Hi everyone, this is Travels with an Archaeologist. I'm the Archaeologist, now let's get into the travels.
Today we're in Palestine, and no, I'm not making a political statement. Now, do you think it's inappropriate of me to talk about the archaeology of this region without at least acknowledging the current situation? Well, I actually agree with you, but you know who doesn't? You guys. Yeah, because I actually did acknowledge the issue and my opinions on it in a hopefully one-time political piece, but nobody watched it. And I know that it was a choice because it was released alongside Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump, which broke viewership records. So if you do want me to acknowledge the issue and have 20 free minutes, I'll include the link to that video at the end of this one. But this video is about pure history and archaeology. That means that your comments aren't allowed to complain about it. If you do want to discuss the current political situation with me, or something else I don't talk about in this video, go to the actual video I made on this subject and we'll have a discussion there. If you try to post a political comment on this video, it will be deleted. So, as I was saying, today's episode is on the West Bank, and archaeology here can be quite tricky for several reasons. For one thing, it's actually illegal to conduct it here these days. The UN considers this occupied territory and as such frowns upon any archaeological excavations. And even if the UN did allow this, who would lead it? It would be tricky to get an expedition both Israelis and Palestinians would agree to, and frankly, they have bigger issues to sort out first. Now, yes, it is more complicated than that, and yes, there is more detail, but honestly, as I said, if you want to turn this into a big political discourse, go to the video I made on it. And I just want to give you an overview of the situation, not launch into a big political treatise. This video is only discussing politics insofar as it affects the archaeology of the region, so that means that I do need to mention the 1995 Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords split Palestine into 3 areas of control, and as agreed by both Israeli and Palestinian governments. Zone A is under Palestinian control, Zone C is under Israeli control, and Zone B is in a fuzzy gray area that, on paper at least, is controlled by both parties, but in reality tends to be mostly Israeli controlled. Now, if this sounds fuzzy and doomed to failure, that's because these accords were only meant to be temporary. And why they aren't temporary, and what's gone on since then, and the implications of it today are again a political topic, not a topic of archaeology and history, so we are going to move on. So this video, I have 3 sites to present to you, all of which are in the recognized West Bank, and 2 of them are from Zone A under Palestinian control. Now, full disclosure, I have only been to 2 of these sites, so let's start with the one I haven't been to, because it's also one of the most fascinating sites you will ever hear about. That site is Jericho. Jericho is something of a legend despite its tiny size, both in the religious world and the archaeological one. It's said to be the oldest continuously inhabited city on Earth, and this would be true, except there is a gap in occupation in the late Bronze Age. Or so some say. Others dispute that and say that there is no gap and it's actually just a very small population. But as we can't do any archaeology here, the question is unlikely to be resolved anytime soon. If you're wondering, the oldest non-controversial continuously inhabited city in the world is Damascus. Jericho was founded around the year 9500 BCE. Now, to put that in perspective, writing was invented around 3000 BCE. That's a gap of 6,000 years. If you went back from where you are today to the dawn of writing and then went back again, you would find Jericho was still 1,000 years older than that. Jericho's most notorious finds are the skulls. Sometime around 7000 BCE, the people of Jericho removed the heads of their dead and encased their skulls in clay, even putting in rather unsettling fake eyes. And these are the actual clay skulls that you can see in the British Museum, and yes, under that clay is a real human skull. Though it seems unsettling, it seems to be quite a common death ritual at the time for Jericho, and we don't really know why. Again, these people were so far removed from written history that we genuinely have no idea. Without writing, what would you know about ancient Mesopotamia? Exactly. And remember, the ancient Mesopotamians are closer to us, chronologically. Jericho was famously destroyed in the Bible, but rebuilt and has remained occupied ever since. Or rather, despite the destruction, it remained occupied depending on which view you want to use. It was destroyed multiple times in the Bronze Age, but each time it seemed to rebuild even bigger as people flocked to the city due to its fertile soil and warm weather. And now you might be wondering, what of the biblical accounts? Now, there was an excavation of Jericho by Kathleen Kenyon, whom I've discussed in another video, specifically in its ancient site, es-Sultan. Kenyon's big destruction layer leading to the decline of Jericho was dated to about 1550 BCE, which is well before the Egyptians pulled out, and thus before the biblical kingdom would have been founded. However, this date does come under some scrutiny. There is some debate if there is a period of abandonment around the time of the Bible, when it was claimed that they had destroyed Jericho. However, elements of the abandonment seem to have happened organically, not through destruction. It's a touchy subject, and given you can't practice archaeology on the tell until the region sorts out its political issues, we can't really look further into the subject, and we don't really expect there to be a way to resolve this anytime soon. The Iron Age city sat at the top of the tell at this point and had to be reached by staircases, and it remained an important regional center. However, it had not matched the height of its previous power and influence in the Bronze Age. The tell was abandoned by about 500 BCE, as near as I can tell. However, the site itself was not abandoned, as modern Jericho sprang up as soon as the tell was abandoned. And that's all I can really say about Jericho. Having not visited this site myself, it does mean that I haven't really explored around it, so I can't say much of it. You will have to go through checkpoints to get here, which personally I don't mind doing, but do be aware that it's a hurdle you will have to face if you do decide to head to this city. Our second site is, of course, Bethlehem. Now, Bethlehem is a beautiful city, and as the place where Jesus was born, quite a popular pilgrimage site. And as I've said in a previous video, Jesus was indeed a real person, but the circumstances of his birth have passed into legend. Jesus, first of all, was not born on December 25th, nor was he born in 1 BCE. And again, this is not me countering religion. The Bible tells us this much. The stars that the 3 wise men followed are in fact visible in Bethlehem only in the summer, not in the winter, and it is noted that Jesus was born during the end of the reign of Herod, which could mean either 2 things, but neither of them leads us to 1 BCE. Herod the Great, typically taken as the Herod of the Bible, was dead and buried in 4 BCE, and thus this is typically given as the actual date of Jesus' birth. However, it might also refer to Herod Archelaus, whose reign was full of strife and rebellion until he was finally dismissed by Augustus, and replaced by the Roman governor Quirinius in 6 CE. And the Gospel of Luke states that Jesus was born during this census which Quirinius ordered. Thus, 6 CE is also given as a date of Jesus' birth. The reason the date gets muddled is partially due to the arguments over how the text should be interpreted and how accurate our timeline really is, but also by working backwards from the date of Jesus' baptism, when it was said that he was about 30 in the 15th year of the reign of the Emperor Tiberius. In short, the Bible is actually way less clear on Jesus' birth than we'd like it to be. But whenever he was born, you can forget the scene of the nativity you see in Christmas. Any wood you got in this area wouldn't have been wasted on an animal stable. Stables of this period in Bethlehem were caves, and indeed caves do dot the surrounding hillsides, and the Church of the Nativity lies over a cave. Now, the big question is it over the right cave? And the answer is, I don't know. Some archaeologists and textual scholars say it's not, others say it is. Personally, I don't really see enough evidence given in the text for us to determine it one way or another. It might have been, or it might have not been. If you watch my Jerusalem video, I explain more about the woman who built this church, St. Helena, and why her information was less than reliable.
The church has roots in the 4th century, however it was small. Parts of this original church survive in the underground sections, like here. Most of the current church you'll see was originally built by the Emperor Justinian, who also built the Hagia Sophia. The nearby Church of St. Catherine is also worth a visit, as it contains the chapels where St. Jerome translated the Bible into Latin, and where the bodies of all the children murdered by Herod were buried in a place called the Chapel of the Innocents. But there are no bodies known from archaeological excavations to support this story.
When Jesus was born, or so the Christians say, Herod ordered all the babies of the land to be killed to prevent him from claiming his throne. This was Herod's most famous and heinous act, and while Herod was a decadent and cruel individual, this, his most famous act, is likely to be the one he actually did not commit. On that note, let's talk about Herod and our third site, the Herodium. The Herodium is technically under Area C Israeli administration. However, it does lie within a recognized West Bank boundary. The Herodium is supposedly Herod the Great's final resting place and has been believed to be ever since the excavations began in 1962 when the area was still under Jordanian control. Excavations continued until the Six-Day War of 1967. Israel then conducted new excavations following this war over the objections of the Palestinian Authority, and this guy identified it as the final resting place of Herod the Great in 2007. He actually died here. Yeah, a railing gave way on his 2010 expedition and he fell off and died. Excavations have halted since then. However, his identification of this as the tomb of Herod has been challenged by other scholars who argue his tomb was too modest. Herod the Great has a well-earned reputation for cruelty, brutality, and paranoia. The historian Macrobius once quipped that it was better to be Herod's pig than his son, for he had a habit of killing his relatives if he believed they were going to overthrow him. He took the side of Mark Antony in Augustus's war primarily as it was he and Cleopatra who helped Herod rise and cling to power, but some quick political sucking up meant that he returned to his position after Augustus had won the war. I'll actually get into that in more detail in a future video. Herod was not a popular leader, however. Both Christians and Jews saw him as tyrannical even in his own time. He spent huge amounts of money on his building programs, which left the people impoverished. On a political level, he did align with Rome, which did not endear him to the local population. However, it was the show of religious toleration that really turned the Orthodox population against him. He did build non-Jewish temples all across Judea, while also patronizing existing Jewish ones. Even so, there isn't a crime in the world Herod isn't accused of partaking in, and to be honest, many of them he actually did, from murder to embezzlement and even to regicide. He had replaced the old Hasmonean order through a 3-year civil war and executed the last leader after promising to forgive him. Yet, when Jesus was born in 4 BCE, let's take that date for sake of argument, Herod was on his deathbed with a bad case of swelling and arthritis. He was likely dead before news of Jesus' birth could ever reach him, if indeed word was ever sent. Following Herod's death, the Herodium would have been a small village with a tiny population of people whose job it was to look after his tomb. Problem was, Herod was not remembered fondly. Although this did indeed serve as a town for a few years, ultimately this place was abandoned, especially when the Romans came out outright annexed the Herodian realm into the province of Judea. As to the Herodium itself, it seems that this might have been where Herod lived his day-to-day life. Like so many other pieces of architecture that Herod left behind, it has cisterns to collect water, storage, and beautiful mosaics. But it also has a large tower where Herod is believed to have lived his day-to-day life. It also had a very small Roman theater which still had a separate VIP section. It made a handy fortress after he died too, and it was used as a base by Simon Bar Kokhba during his revolt in the 2nd century under the reign of Emperor Hadrian. It was likely during this revolt that Herod's tomb, if it was ever in this area, would have been smashed, as he was never very popular among the Orthodox people of the region. Now, I do want to give a shout to one last site in the West Bank which could not be mentioned in this video, that site being Qumran. This was the location of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this site will be featured in a video on the Dead Sea site. So why did I opt to do this rather than stick it in here? Well, honestly, it just felt really wrong to not talk about something called the Dead Sea Scrolls in my Dead Sea video, but this location is technically in the West Bank. With that being said, I am done with the West Bank for today. I hope I've shone a light on this underappreciated region, as my goal is not to send a political message, but to highlight that there are some places of extraordinary significance here, and I hope one day in the future you'll be able to return and glean more information from these sites, valuable not just to Israelis and Palestinians, but to all of humanity. And that's all for today. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Please do remember to like and subscribe. The link to my Patreon is in the description. And until next time, I'm the Archaeologist, and this has been The Travels.